It was supposed to be a safe space, a podcast known for wit and empathy, where guests could open up, laugh, and maybe even heal. But that afternoon, under the bright studio lights and the watching eyes of a global audience, a prince sat across from a comedian, and what started as a conversation about trauma would turn into one of the most uncomfortable interviews of his life. Prince Harry had walked into Hasan Minhaj's studio expecting to be understood. After all, Hasan wasn't just another late-night host with a scripted monologue. He was sharp, self-aware, political, and famously human. His comedy didn't punch down, it dissected. But that was before he had a real-life royal in front of him. Before he decided that laughter, even at someone else's expense, was a language too tempting not to speak. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine it. A royal, stripped of his titles, but not his fame, sitting in a studio built for jokes and punchlines. Cameras rolling, audience laughing, microphones so sensitive they could catch every breath. Harry thought he was there to talk about pain, about the years of silent suffering he'd endured since losing his mother. Instead, he became a meme before the podcast episode even dropped. You could almost hear the moment things turned. The air thickened, the smile on Hasan's face curved differently. The audience leaned in just slightly. They knew something was coming, even if Harry didn't. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it was the kind that burns quietly, a reminder that vulnerability in the wrong room becomes entertainment. How did it come to this? How did the same man who once walked proudly behind his mother's coffin, the symbol of public empathy, end up being laughed at for talking about therapy, shopping, and trauma? To understand that, you have to step back. You have to see the version of Harry that arrived in Los Angeles. Tired, determined, and forever chasing control over his own story. He thought the world had misunderstood him, that his honesty in the memoir Spare would finally clear the air. That was the plan. Bare the soul, win the sympathy, reset the narrative. But there's something cruel about modern fame. It takes confession and turns it into comedy. Hasan Minhaj didn't plan to humiliate Harry, at least not openly. He began the interview like he always did, disarming, charming, quick with a laugh. The first few minutes flowed like any other chat, talk about family, duty, life after the crown. Then came the pivot. Hasan leaned forward, lowered his tone, and said the words that caught everyone off guard. You know, Harry, in Spare, you talked about how hard it was to feel normal, to do normal things. Like, what was it, shopping at TK Maxx? The audience chuckled, just a small ripple at first. Harry smiled weakly, nodding, not realizing the trap had already sprung. Hasan continued, voice playful, eyes glinting. Yeah, man, you're out there trying to find deals on chinos while the rest of the world's like, wait, a Prince shop's discount. The laughter swelled. Harry laughed too, but it wasn't real. His shoulders stiffened. His lips twitched. The chuckle didn't reach his eyes. Hasan went on, sensing the momentum. I mean, picture it. Prince Harry, in line with a coupon, telling the cashier he's trying to live like the people. Come on, bro. Even my uncle from Delhi doesn't pull that move. Laughter again. Louder this time. The kind that feeds itself. And then, silence. Hasan's grin faded just slightly. He saw it. Harry's hands tightening around his cup, the twitch in his jaw, the distant stare. The joke had landed, but not the way anyone expected. What was supposed to be a light-hearted ribbing turned into something raw and exposed. Harry leaned in and muttered, half joking, half pleading, I'm sweating, mate. Hasan tried to laugh it off, but the tension wouldn't die. It sat there between them like an uninvited ghost. But let's rewind. That moment didn't happen in isolation. It was years in the making, a slow build-up of public perception, media fatigue, and self-inflicted wounds. Harry had been trying to prove something for years, that he was normal, that he could laugh at himself, that the royal bubble hadn't made him fragile. Yet the irony was painful. The harder he tried to appear human, the more people treated him like a caricature. When he released Spare, it was meant to be a reckoning, a story about grief, identity, and redemption. But buried between confessions about frostbite and therapy were strange moments of unintended humor, lines that critics feasted on. The TK Maxx story was one of them. He thought it made him relatable. Instead, it made him a punchline. Hasan Minhaj, ever the satirist, couldn't resist. To him, The TK Maxx anecdote represented everything about modern royalty's tone deafness. Billionaires pretending to be humble, aristocrats play acting as commoners. For Hasan, it was comedy gold. For Harry, it was humiliation dressed as humor. By the time the podcast episode aired, clips of that exchange were everywhere. TikTok users slowed down the moment Harry's fake smile cracked. Reddit threads dissected the sweating comment frame by frame. Twitter users joked, even TK Maxx didn't deserve this PR. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was a cultural event. But none of that explains what happened inside that studio, the psychology behind it, the vulnerability that turned against him. That's where this story really lives. Because for Harry, it wasn't about TK Maxx. It was about being seen again as the outcast prince. About watching someone else hold the narrative reins. About realizing that even when he tells his story, it no longer belongs to him once it hits the public ear. That realization is what broke him. Now picture this. The lights dim slightly. Hasan, sensing the discomfort, softens his tone. Hey man, I'm just teasing. You know that, right? Harry forces a smile. Yeah, no worries. But the camera captures something else, his eyes darting, his hand brushing sweat from his neck. He's exposed, vulnerable, but not in the way he intended. The studio audience laughs again, though not as loudly. The tension's changed. It's heavier now. Some viewers at home will later call it the moment the joke died. Others will call it the moment Harry became human again. But to those in the room, it felt like watching a dam crack slowly, one emotion at a time. And here's where it gets stranger. After the show, according to a producer who later spoke anonymously, Harry stayed in the green room longer than expected. He sat alone for several minutes, head in his hands. Meghan's team members hovered outside, unsure whether to enter. One of them finally did, and found him staring at the floor, whispering, "It always ends the same." That line would become symbolic. It always ends the same. Whether he was talking about interviews, friendships, or public appearances, no one knew. But what they did know was that something in him shifted that day. The fallout didn't take long. Within hours of the podcast airing, hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Harry humiliated. Hashtag Hasan roast royal. Memes spread like wildfire, some cruel, some simply amused. The clip was replayed on morning shows and reaction channels. Commentators debated whether Hasan went too far. Others said Harry needed to toughen up. A few voices, however, noticed the deeper issue. The exhaustion in Harry's eyes, the emotional fatigue that no joke could hide. Why does this moment matter? Because it marks a shift not just in Harry's image, but in how the world treats vulnerability. For years, we demanded honesty from public figures. We said we wanted them real, raw, unfiltered. But the second they deliver, we laugh. We mock. We meme it into oblivion. Harry became the ultimate example of that paradox. Too fake when he's composed, too fragile when he's real. And for Hasan, it was a lesson too. He didn't just roast a prince. He exposed the fragility of empathy in entertainment. His fans praised the segment for its authenticity, for daring to challenge a royal narrative. But behind the applause, there was a quiet question. Did he cross a line? As the clip reached millions, both men retreated in their own ways. Hasan brushed it off publicly but admitted privately that the tone got heavier than expected. Harry, meanwhile, canceled 2 minor interviews scheduled for the following week. Insiders claimed he felt ambushed. In truth, the ambush wasn't external, it was emotional. A comedian didn't break him. The weight of his own narrative did. Because here's the uncomfortable truth no one said aloud. Harry's vulnerability, the very thing that once made people adore him, had become his brand. Every tear, every confession, every emotional revelation was both a catharsis and a commodity. And once something becomes a commodity, it stops being yours. That's what happened on Hasan's podcast. The laughter wasn't just about TK Maxx. It was the sound of an audience realizing they no longer pitted him. They were entertained by him. By the end of the taping, Harry smiled politely, shook Hasan's hand, and walked out into the California afternoon. The sun was bright, too bright. Cameras followed him from a distance. A witness later said he looked pale. One producer recalled him muttering, "I knew it would turn." He got into a black SUV and left without speaking to anyone. The door closed, the sound sharp and final. Inside, his team sat in silence. No one dared play the clip back yet. They didn't need to. They already knew it was viral gold, and emotional poison. Outside, Hasan recorded a light-hearted behind-the-scenes video for social media, joking, "Great chat with Prince Harry. Stay tuned, it gets real." Little did he know just how real it had become. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. It was the collision of two worlds, royal fragility and comedic brutality, and the fallout would ripple across the internet, through Hollywood, and even back to Buckingham Palace. But before the headlines, before the backlash, before the late-night monologues and think pieces, there was one moment no one saw coming. Something Harry said, off mic, almost to himself, would change everything. Because the podcast might have ended that day, but the real story was just beginning. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It started with an email. A simple one. Subject line: invitation to appear on The Honest Hour with Hasan Minhaj. No fanfare, no royal letterhead, no PR preamble. Just a few polite sentences from Hasan's production team, inviting Prince Harry to join for a conversation about vulnerability, fame, and finding peace after chaos. Harry read it 3 times. At first, he thought it was a prank. A comedian wanting to talk about healing? The irony wasn't lost on him. But then his assistant confirmed it. Yes, Hasan's team had reached out personally, and yes, they were serious. They wanted to have an authentic conversation about how trauma shapes men in the public eye. It sounded harmless enough, almost flattering. After all, Harry had spent months trying to reshape his public image, from the spare prince to the global advocate for mental health. This could help, he thought. It could show that he wasn't afraid to laugh at himself, that he could blend seriousness with humor, that he could finally own his story. Still, a tiny voice in the back of his head whispered, "Don't do it." But Meghan loved the idea. "He's not like the others," she told him over dinner that night. "Hasan's smart, he's progressive, he gets it. This isn't a late-night roast, it's a cultural conversation. Exactly the kind of platform you need." Harry smiled weakly, pushing food around his plate. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that this time, it would go differently, that someone would actually listen, not just laugh. Meghan continued, her tone persuasive. "Think about it. You'll reach his audience. Young, diverse, global. People who actually care about change. Not tabloids, not the old guard. Real people. This could be your bridge back." Her words made sense. But Harry's instincts hummed with quiet unease. Ever since the Oprah interview, every safe space had turned into another battlefield. Every attempt to reclaim his voice somehow gave others more ammunition. Yet, here he was again, tempted by the promise of redemption through exposure. He leaned back and exhaled. "All right," he said softly. "Let's do it." The decision seemed small at the time, just another stop on the media tour. But in hindsight, it would become one of those defining moments you can't undo. Weeks passed, and the preparation began. Meghan's PR team worked closely with Hasan's producers. The setup was billed as a friendly, transparent conversation about healing and humor. No politics, no scandal, just a casual talk between two men who'd both navigated the weight of public life. But the energy in the room on recording day told a different story. The studio smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. The walls were lined with soundproof padding, the lights warm but sharp. Harry arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a simple gray shirt and dark jeans, his attempt at casual authenticity. His security team lingered outside while Hasan's crew made adjustments to the cameras. Harry smiled at the staff, but his eyes darted constantly. He'd done hundreds of interviews before, but something about this setting felt different. Intimate. Unpredictable. Hasan's voice echoed from the hallway. A booming, confident tone that carried both warmth and danger. "Ah, there's our guest of honor," Hasan said as he entered, flashing his signature grin. "Man, this is surreal. I've had presidents, activists, even rappers on this show, but a prince? That's a first." Harry chuckled politely. "I'm not really a prince anymore, technically." Right," Hasan teased, pulling up a chair. "Just a regular guy who's been on the cover of every magazine on Earth." The crew laughed. Harry smiled again, but the humor didn't quite land. It was light, friendly, but edged. A reminder of the imbalance in the room. One man controlled the script, the other lived inside it. They chatted briefly before the cameras rolled. Hasan was quick, charismatic, effortlessly disarming. He complimented Harry's courage for speaking openly about mental health. He called Spare a brave piece of work. He asked about fatherhood, therapy, life in California. Harry relaxed slightly. Maybe this would go well after all. Then, Hasan leaned forward. You cool if we go deep? Like really deep? Harry nodded. That's the point, isn't it? Hasan smiled. Exactly. But beneath that smile, there was calculation. Hasan wasn't malicious. He was just doing what good comedians do. He found the line between empathy and mockery and danced on it. The question was whether Harry realized that yet. The truth is, Hasan's team had debated this episode for weeks. Some argued it was too risky. You can't roast trauma, one producer said. Especially not a royal's trauma. But Hasan had disagreed. Comedy is the mirror, he'd said. If he's genuine, people will see that. If he's performative, they'll see that too. Either way, it's real. To Hasan, the episode was about testing authenticity in a world obsessed with image. To Harry, it was just another chance to be heard. Neither man saw the emotional collision coming. The recording began with laughter. Always laughter. Hasan opened with light questions: California life, parenting, favorite shows to binge watch. The audience, small but lively, responded warmly. Harry cracked a few jokes about learning American slang, about his kids correcting his accent. For a moment, everything felt easy. But that ease was deceptive, because every good story, every great interview, builds to a turn. And in this one, the turn came quietly, wrapped in humor, disguised as banter. Harry, Hasan said halfway through, you wrote in Spare that therapy saved you, that you learned to find peace through routine, meditation, even shopping. Harry smiled, remembering the passage. Yeah, I mentioned that. I like finding small things that make me feel normal. Hasan leaned in, eyebrows raised. Even if that normal means TK Maxx. The room laughed. Harry chuckled nervously. Yeah, that's in there. Hasan smirked. Bro, you're telling me the guy who grew up in palaces is out here hunting discount jeans? Respect, man. But I gotta ask, did you get the loyalty card too? Laughter again. Louder this time. Harry tried to respond, but the words tangled. I mean, it's not like that. It's more the experience of, feeling ordinary, you know? Hasan nodded slowly, pretending to understand, then shot back. Right. Nothing says ordinary like a $40 hoodie next to a rack of clearance socks. You're one of us, bro. Even the crew laughed now. The rhythm of comedy took over, unstoppable. And for a moment, Harry's expression flickered. Not anger, not embarrassment exactly, but something between them. A quiet recognition that he was no longer being listened to. He was being watched. He shifted in his seat, tugged at his collar. The camera caught it. I'm sweating, mate, he said under his breath. Hasan laughed. But there was an awkward pause in the room that no one could quite explain. The energy shifted, like someone had opened a door to cold air. And that's where everything began to unravel. Because that single moment, the half-laugh, the visible discomfort, the sweat, would later become the image that defined the entire episode. The internet wouldn't remember the thoughtful parts, the empathy, or the talk about grief. They would remember the joke, the discount store, the prince sweating in a chair. But in that moment, sitting under the heat of the studio lights, Harry didn't know any of that yet. He just knew something felt off. He knew this wasn't going to be the conversation he expected. After the show wrapped, Hasan thanked him warmly, calling it one of the best episodes yet. Harry smiled politely, but as soon as the cameras stopped, his voice dropped. That TK Maxx thing, you were joking, right? Hasan raised an eyebrow. Of course. You good? Harry nodded too quickly. Yeah, all good. But it wasn't. Something about the way Hasan said it. Light, dismissive, almost rehearsed, stung. It felt like a joke meant for headlines, not healing. Later that night, back home, Megan replayed the footage from a preview copy. She froze the screen at the moment Hasan delivered the TK Maxx line. You didn't see that coming, did you? She asked quietly. Harry shook his head. No, I thought it was going to be serious. It was, until it wasn't, she said. And in that moment, the dread began. Because somewhere deep down, they both knew. Laughter spreads faster than empathy. And once the world starts laughing, it doesn't stop. What neither of them knew was that the real fallout hadn't even started yet. The episode wasn't live. The edits weren't final. And Hasan Minhaj still had one segment to record, a voiceover outro that would change the tone of everything. A few days later, a producer called Megan's office. Just letting you know, Hasan added a small commentary at the end. she said carefully. You might want to preview it before it goes out. Megan didn't think much of it at first, but when she watched the new ending, her heart sank. Because Hasan hadn't just interviewed Harry, he'd analyzed him, publicly, with words that would ignite the internet like wildfire. And that's where this story truly begins, where a casual invitation turns into a cultural explosion. Because Hasan Minhaj wasn't done yet. And what came next would redefine how the world saw Prince Harry forever. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a comedian before he takes the stage, that electric pause between laughter and revelation. Hasan Minhaj had built an empire inside that pause. To some, he was a truth-teller. To others, a provocateur hiding behind a charming smile. But to everyone, he was dangerous, the kind of man who could make you laugh and bleed in the same sentence. Prince Harry didn't quite understand that yet. When the podcast invitation arrived, Harry saw Hasan as an intellectual ally, someone who blended activism with entertainment, who stood for something beyond celebrity. What he didn't realize was that Hasan didn't just host conversations, he dissected them. Every guest was a case study. Every topic, a target. For Hasan, humor was never about escape. It was about exposure. He had roasted politicians, mocked presidents, and skewered cultural hypocrisy under the disguise of comedy. His words were surgical, sharp enough to draw blood, but disguised with a grin. And now, for the first time, he had a real-life prince on his set. It wasn't just another guest. It was a symbol. Royalty, privilege, trauma, all wrapped in one conflicted man. For Hasan, it was gold. For Harry, it would soon be a nightmare. The idea for the episode had started weeks before the invitation went out. Hasan's production meetings were like small war councils, whiteboards filled with words, ideas, and arrows linking them like battlefield strategies. At the top of the board that day were 3 words: authenticity, privilege, pain. One producer had asked, "Can someone be both privileged and traumatized?" Hasan had smiled, tapping the board. That's the point. The contradiction is the story. When Harry's name came up, it was instant consensus. Here was a man who claimed to hate the spotlight, but couldn't live outside it. A man who wanted privacy but signed deals with Netflix and Spotify. A man who fled the monarchy but couldn't stop talking about it. He's fascinating, Hasan had said, pacing. He wants to be relatable, but every time he tries, he becomes a meme. It's tragic and kind of perfect. The producers exchanged wary looks. They'd seen what happened when satire met royalty. The internet never forgave or forgot. But Hasan was undeterred. I'm not mocking his trauma, he insisted. I'm exposing how the system commodifies pain, even his. It was idealistic. It was noble. It was also naive. Because audiences don't always hear nuance. They hear punchlines. When Hasan's team confirmed Harry's appearance, social media buzzed. Minhaj interviews a prince? This'll be juicy, one fan tweeted. Another wrote, hope he doesn't hold back. Royals are fair game. Hasan's wife, Bina, even cautioned him at home. You know this could blow up, right? She asked one night over dinner. Hasan laughed it off. If it blows up, that means people are talking. Isn't that the point? He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't ready for how loud that explosion would get. By the time the recording day arrived, Hasan had already envisioned the rhythm of the conversation. He'd start with empathy, make Harry feel safe, respected, heard. Then, when the guard was down, he'd pivot. A subtle shift from sympathy to satire, from ally to challenger. That was his craft. Comedy wasn't about comfort. It was about truth, and truth rarely came wrapped in comfort. But something about that plan changed the moment Harry walked into the studio. Hasan expected arrogance. He expected defensiveness. Instead, he saw a man who looked tired, polite, but wary. He carried himself like someone used to being attacked and pretending not to care. That kind of fragility intrigued Hasan even more. When the cameras rolled, he started gently. Man, I gotta say, I appreciate you coming here. It takes guts to be open when the world's always got jokes locked and loaded. Harry smiled, grateful for the warmth. Thanks. I figured if you can laugh at politicians, I can take a little ribbing. Hasan laughed, slapping the table. We'll see, man. We'll see. The audience chuckled. The tone was set, light, friendly, almost brotherly. At first, for the first 20 minutes, Hasan played the empathetic host. He asked about Harry's transition from royal duties to California life. They joked about British weather, American coffee sizes, and cultural adjustments. It flowed easily. The audience was charmed. Harry even cracked a few jokes himself, surprising everyone. But then, like every great comic, Hasan sensed it was time to twist the tone. He leaned back and said casually, "You know, in Spare, there's a moment I found fascinating. You talk about wanting to feel normal. You mentioned going to TK Maxx to shop like regular people. Do you remember writing that?" Harry chuckled. "Yeah, I do. It was sort of symbolic. The idea that even small acts can make you feel grounded." Hasan nodded thoughtfully. "Totally. I mean, I get it. I'm brown. I grew up loving a good sale. TK Maxx is like therapy, right?" Laughter filled the room. Harry smiled, relieved. For a second, he thought maybe Hasan was on his side. Then the switch flipped. Hasan's tone changed, just slightly. Enough for the audience to catch it. "But hold up. Let's be honest, bro. You're a prince. You can't be out here pretending you're clipping coupons. You can take the crown off your head, but you can't TK Maxx your way out of privilege." The laughter turned sharper. Harry laughed awkwardly, rubbing his hands together. "It wasn't about that. It was about—" Hasan interrupted, smiling. I know. But come on. Can you imagine that scene? You, standing in line with a basket, hoping nobody notices, while the cashier's like, "Wait, aren't you that guy from the palace?" The audience erupted. Even Hasan laughed at his own impression. It was quick, clever, perfectly timed. The kind of line that trends on social media within minutes. But it also broke something invisible in the room. Because in that moment, Harry wasn't a guest anymore. He was a punchline. And the worst part? He knew it. The nervous laugh, the tightened jaw, the shifting posture, all signs of discomfort. But Hasan, riding the rhythm of the crowd, didn't notice. Or maybe he did and couldn't stop. That's the curse of comedians. Once the laugh train starts, it's impossible to hit the brakes. It was only later, during editing, that Hasan would replay the footage and catch it. That subtle look in Harry's eyes. The moment where humor met humiliation. But at that point, it was too late. What people forget is that comedians are storytellers first, performers second. They study the emotional terrain of their subjects. They poke until something real emerges. And when it does, they decide whether to cradle it or crush it. Hasan, whether he meant to or not, chose the latter. For weeks afterward, people would debate whether he'd crossed a line. But inside that studio, the line didn't just blur, it vanished. The recording ended with applause. Hasan thanked Harry warmly, calling him a real one. Harry smiled, but his voice trembled as he said goodbye. After he left, the room was quiet. One producer finally exhaled. "That was intense." Hasan shrugged. "It's what people need to see. Vulnerability's real only when it's uncomfortable." Another producer hesitated. "He looked hurt, man." Hasan's smile faded. "Good. That means it mattered." He said it with conviction, but something in his gut twisted. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he'd gone too far. The next morning, while reviewing the footage, that doubt grew heavier. Every frame told the same story. The joke landed perfectly, but the cost was visible. Harry's face had changed. The warmth drained out, replaced by quiet humiliation. Still, the producer in Hasan's ear, the part trained to chase impact, whispered louder than conscience. "It's viral material. You can't cut it. People will eat this up." And he was right. That clip would soon explode across every platform imaginable. But before the internet got it, before the hashtags and hot takes, Hasan sat alone in his office and replayed the moment again. Over and over. He told himself it was fine. That comedy needed discomfort. That even Harry would laugh about it later. But deep down, another voice whispered, "You didn't just expose him. You exposed yourself." Because in trying to show how absurd fame can be, Hasan had become part of the very spectacle he mocked. And when that realization hit, it was already too late. The episode was locked. The team scheduled the release. The promotional clips were cut. And somewhere across town, in Montecito, Meghan Markle was about to see that preview, the one that would ignite a storm neither man could control. Because in comedy, timing is everything. And the timing on this couldn't have been worse. What came next would turn a single punchline into an international controversy, and it would test both men's reputations in ways neither saw coming. Because when you mix royalty with satire, only one walks away unscathed. And this time, it wouldn't be the prince. When Prince Harry released his memoir Spare, he imagined it as liberation, a cleansing of his story, finally told in his own words. It wasn't meant to be funny or even shocking. It was meant to be truthful. But truth, once released into the wild, has a strange way of mutating. What was raw and sincere on the page became entertainment in the mouths of others. And on Hasan Minhaj's podcast, that truth became something else entirely: ammunition. The day before the podcast aired, Harry sat in the quiet of his Montecito home, sipping tea and staring out at the California horizon. The Pacific stretched endlessly, peaceful yet mocking. It looked nothing like England. No gray skies, no drizzle. And yet, somehow, the storm always found him anyway. He had no idea that, by the next morning, his words about shopping at TK Maxx would be the #1 trending joke on social media. But deep down, he should have expected it. Spare had already taught him that once people start laughing, they rarely stop. Because for all the emotion, grief, and vulnerability Harry had poured into his memoir, the world hadn't fixated on his pain. It had fixated on his oddities: the frostbite story, the psychedelic mushrooms, the TK Maxx ordinary man anecdote. He'd given the world a confession, and they'd turned it into a comedy special. And now, with Hasan, it was happening all over again. Let's rewind. When Spare first came out, Harry's team thought they'd struck gold. The book sold millions of copies in days. People were crying, analyzing, empathizing. But then the internet did what it always does. It memed him into oblivion. Clips of audiobook narrator Harry solemnly describing his frozen Todger played over dance tracks. TikTok users reenacted his TK Maxx shopping moment with crowns and discount racks. His sincerity became satire. The world didn't want a human prince. It wanted a tragicomic one. And Hasan Minhaj, consciously or not, tapped into that exact energy. On the day of recording, he'd asked his writers to pull a few relatable excerpts from Spare. They landed on the TK Maxx passage. It was perfect, absurd, self-serious, and unintentionally funny. It captured everything that frustrated people about Harry: the disconnect between privilege and performance. Hasan had said it out loud in the writer's room: "We're not mocking the trauma, we're mocking the tone." The man cries about war, then brags about buying discount khakis. That's not tragedy, that's irony. And so, in that small studio, what began as empathy turned into entertainment. When Hasan read from Spare during the taping, he did it with perfect comedic rhythm. His voice softened, imitating Harry's audiobook narration. "I love TK Maxx. The smell of the place, the chaos of the racks, the thrill of the find." The audience chuckled. Then Hasan dropped the punch. "Bro, you sound like you're describing an underground fight club, not a retail chain." The laughter exploded. Even Harry tried to laugh along, but his eyes gave him away. The humor stung. And here's the cruel irony: the very words that had once earned him sympathy were now the reason he was being laughed at. Because Spare wasn't written for jokes. It was written for catharsis. Harry had bared everything: his grief, his resentment toward his family, his loneliness, his confusion about identity. But in a culture that consumes oversharing like entertainment, honesty can become a trap. The moment he said too much, people stopped hearing him and started watching him. They stopped empathizing and started dissecting. And now, sitting across from Hasan, Harry could feel that same dissection happening in real time. It was the way Hasan leaned forward with curiosity, smiling, but with eyes that analyzed. The way the audience laughed not with him, but at him. The way every sincere answer he gave turned into a setup for the next joke. "Do you regret writing Spare?" Hasan asked suddenly, midway through the conversation. Harry blinked. "No, not regret. I needed to say those things. It's how I process things." Hasan nodded. "I get that. But do you ever feel like you gave too much? Like maybe people are laughing at the wrong parts?" Harry hesitated. "Sometimes. But that's on them, not me." Hasan smiled knowingly. "Sure. But when millions of people are laughing, at what point does it become on you?" The audience murmured. It wasn't a joke, it was a dagger. Harry swallowed, forcing composure. "I can't control how people interpret my truth." Hasan raised an eyebrow. "But you can control how much of it you sell." The line hung in the air. Even the crew went silent. That was Hasan at his sharpest, blending humor with confrontation, wrapping criticism in charm. To him, it was a valid question. To Harry, It was humiliation disguised as introspection. He tried to recover, speaking about vulnerability and healing, about breaking the cycle of repression he'd inherited. But the words stumbled. He could feel the temperature rising, the air tightening. His chest grew heavy. He muttered, half to himself, "I'm sweating again." The audience laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Hasan laughed too, but his eyes flickered. He could sense it now, the discomfort he'd accidentally unleashed. There's a rule in comedy. Once the audience starts pitying your target, the laughter dies. But here, something strange happened. The laughter didn't die, it shifted. It became that uncomfortable, collective chuckle people make when they don't know whether to laugh or look away. And that's when Harry's expression changed completely. For a brief moment, the charm fell away. You could see it, the exhaustion, the fragility, the weight of years spent trying to explain himself to people who had already decided who he was. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. He looked at Hasan and said softly, "It's funny. People always ask me to be honest. Then they laugh when I am." That line, quiet and unscripted, would later go viral. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Broken, disbelieving. Hasan, caught off guard, tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, man. You know it's all love. You've got to admit, though, a prince talking about TK Maxx? That's comedy gold." Harry smiled faintly. "Maybe to you." The crowd tittered. But the tension didn't fade. What no one saw off camera was the small exchange that followed during the break. Hasan leaned over, voice low. "Hey, you good?" Harry nodded, forcing calm. "Yeah, just not what I expected." Hasan smiled apologetically. "Sorry, man. I go where the conversation takes me." Harry looked down at his hands. "And what happens when it takes you somewhere you shouldn't go?" Hasan hesitated, just for a second, then said, "That's the risk of being honest." The irony of that line wouldn't hit either of them until much later. Because what Hasan didn't realize was that his honesty about Harry's vulnerability, his willingness to mock it, would soon spark one of the most polarized reactions of his career. And what Harry didn't realize was that his honesty about himself would once again make him the world's favorite target. The podcast wrapped with a few more laughs, a handshake, and mutual compliments. But the energy was fractured. Behind every smile was an unspoken tension neither wanted to name. When the episode aired a week later, it exploded instantly. Clips flooded Twitter. Reaction videos on YouTube racked up millions of views overnight. Commentators praised Hasan for saying what everyone was thinking. Others accused him of exploiting Harry's pain for laughs. Memes of Harry sweating circulated under hashtags like #RoyalRoast and #TKMaxPrince. One viral tweet read, "Hasan Minhaj just did what no journalist could, made Prince Harry speechless." Another said, "Harry wanted therapy. He got stand-up comedy instead." It was brutal. But what hurt Harry most wasn't the mockery, it was the betrayal. He believed this would be a conversation about healing. Instead, it became another headline about humiliation. He turned off his phone that night, sat by the window, and muttered the same phrase he'd said in the green room weeks before. "It always ends the same." And maybe it always did. Because no matter how many interviews he gave, no matter how much truth he shared, the world seemed addicted to misunderstanding him. His openness, his pain, it all became content. And while Harry sat in silence, processing the fallout, Hasan Minhaj was across town, sitting in his editing suite, watching the same footage on repeat. He paused at the TK Maxx joke, watching Harry's face closely. He didn't laugh this time. He just sat there, rubbing his temples, and said quietly, "Damn, that one hit too hard." But by then, it was already out. The world had heard the joke. The internet had chosen its villain. And neither of them could take it back. Because honesty, once weaponized, doesn't just reveal, it destroys. And this was only the beginning. Because the next twist wouldn't come from a comedian. It would come from someone much closer to Harry, someone who'd seen it all happen in real time, and who wasn't about to let it slide. What Meghan did next would shock even Hasan himself. And the fallout would be devastating. The clip was only 26 seconds long. 26 seconds of laughter, a smirk, and a single moment of visible discomfort. But in the internet age, that was more than enough to spark a cultural wildfire. It began with a harmless caption, "Hasan Minhaj ROASTS Prince Harry over TK Maxx confession." It was uploaded by one of Hasan's producers, intended as a lighthearted teaser. Within minutes, it had hundreds of comments. Within hours, It had millions of views. By dawn the next day, it wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. Harry's face, half smiling, half embarrassed, looped endlessly across timelines. His awkward laugh had become a punchline. His nervous words, "I'm sweating, mate," were remixed into TikTok sounds, auto-tuned into songs, edited into memes. One user joked, "He sweats like he shops, awkwardly and on sale." Another wrote, "This is the moment the spare became the discount." What was supposed to be an honest reflection about finding normalcy had become global mockery. And Harry, the man who once fought for his own narrative, was once again powerless to control it. The morning the clip exploded, Meghan saw it before he did. She woke early, scrolling through notifications on her phone, and froze when she saw Harry's face on nearly every entertainment account she followed. Her first thought was confusion, then disbelief, then anger. She opened the video, watched Hasan deliver the line, heard the audience's laughter, watched Harry's eyes flicker with discomfort. Her hands clenched. She replayed it again, slower this time. She studied every micro-expression, the small smile, the tightened jaw, the polite chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. She knew that look. She'd seen it before, in palace corridors, during interviews, in every moment where he tried to hide how deeply something cut. By the time Harry came downstairs for breakfast, she was furious. "Have you seen this?" she asked, turning her phone toward him. He blinked, still groggy. "What is it?" "The clip," she said. "Hasan posted it. It's everywhere." He took the phone, played the video. The moment filled the room. Hasan's grin, the audience's laughter, his own awkward smile. For a few seconds, he just stared. No expression, no words, just silence. Then he exhaled, slow and heavy. "So that's what it looks like." Meghan crossed her arms. "You didn't tell me he mocked you like this." "I didn't think he would," Harry said quietly. "It didn't feel like that when we were there. At least, not until it did." "Well, it feels like it now," she snapped. "You look humiliated, Harry." He turned your pain into a joke. He looked down, the weight of it settling in. "I thought we were having a conversation." "I thought." He trailed off, unable to finish. Meghan paced, frustration radiating from her like static. "You thought wrong. He baited you. He waited until you let your guard down, then used your words against you. This isn't vulnerability. This is exploitation." Harry didn't respond. He didn't need to. She was right. By noon, the story had hit every outlet from the BBC to TMZ. "Prince Harry gets roasted on Hasan Minhaj's podcast," read one headline. "Hasan turns royal confession into comedy gold," read another. Late-night hosts jumped on the bandwagon. Jimmy Fallon played the clip, joking. Even TK Maxx is calling for a rebrand after that one. Harry's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. His PR advisor texted, "We can't control the viral cycle. Recommend staying quiet for now." Stay quiet. That phrase again. It haunted him. It was the same advice he'd been given his entire life, when tabloids mocked him, when paparazzi chased him, when headlines painted him as a villain. Stay quiet. Stay calm. Stay royal. But he wasn't royal anymore. He was just a man sitting in his California kitchen, watching himself become the world's favorite joke. That evening, a new clip surfaced, a behind-the-scenes video Hasan had recorded for social media. In it, he laughed with his team after the taping. "Man, Harry's great," he said. "Such a good sport. You know you've done your job right when even a prince sweats on your show." That line hit harder than any joke. Meghan's expression hardened. "He's mocking you again, off camera this time. That's not comedy. That's cruelty." Harry rubbed his temples. "He's a comedian, Meg. It's what he does." "Yeah, well, maybe it's time someone did it to him," she muttered. She wasn't bluffing. Behind the scenes, Meghan reached out to her publicist. If the internet wanted to turn this into a story, she'd make sure it wasn't one-sided. Within 24 hours, an anonymous source close to the Sussexes spoke to an American entertainment outlet. Harry felt blindsided. He thought the podcast would be about healing. Instead, he was ambushed for laughs. The quote spread almost as fast as the original clip. Now, the story wasn't just about the joke, it was about betrayal. And betrayal makes better headlines than humor. By the second day, the backlash began. Fans split into camps. Some sided with Hasan, praising his wit and honesty. Others accused him of punching down, of exploiting someone's trauma for entertainment. Twitter became a war zone. "Hasan Minhaj is a comedic genius," one fan tweeted. "If you can't laugh at yourself, Don't write a book called Spare. Another countered, Harry shared his pain. Hasan turned it into profit. There's a difference. Hasan tried to calm the storm with a short post. Comedy is how we process contradictions. It's never meant to wound. But the internet wasn't in a forgiving mood. One journalist from The Guardian wrote, "When a comedian mocks power, it's satire. When he mocks pain, it's cruelty." The line was quoted everywhere. It became the moral debate of the week. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry avoided all screens. He took long walks, played with the kids, pretended not to notice the world laughing at him again. But at night, when the house went quiet, he'd sit alone and replay the clip in his head. The laughter, the smirk, his own voice cracking. He couldn't stop hearing it. And he couldn't stop asking himself one question. Why does every attempt to tell my story end with someone else owning it? For Hasan, the fallout was equally unsettling. His team celebrated the numbers, record downloads, viral engagement, global press. But he felt uneasy. Success had never felt this hollow. He rewatched the clip one night, pausing on Harry's face. That look, the faint smile hiding embarrassment, gnawed at him. It reminded him of his own worst moments on stage, when he'd crossed a line and felt the room's energy turn cold. Had he done it again? His phone rang. It was his agent. "Man, everyone's talking about this episode. Huge traffic. But listen, the Sussex team's not happy. There's talk of pulling the replay." Hasan frowned. On what grounds? Emotional distress. Embarrassment. They might go public if this keeps blowing up. Hasan sighed. It was a joke. That's what everyone says before it stops being one, the agent said. And that was the moment it hit him. The realization that maybe the joke had gone too far. By week's end, the clip had been viewed over 200 million times. Late-night hosts, YouTubers, TikTok comedians, all had their spin. It became the digital version of a feeding frenzy. Everyone wanted a bite. And through it all, Harry stayed silent. No statements. No interviews. Just silence. But that silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. Pressure that built quietly until something had to give. And it would. Because what no one expected was what Harry planned to do next. The same man who once vowed to never step into the public ring again was about to break that promise. He wasn't going to let a comedian define him. And when he finally spoke, he wouldn't hold back. Because when the world laughs at you long enough, there comes a day when you stop laughing too. And that day was coming. Faster than anyone imagined. It started small. The kind of invisible unraveling no one notices until it's too late. A pause here, a tremor in the voice there. Prince Harry had been holding himself together since the TK Maxx clip detonated across the internet. But cracks were beginning to show. The storm wasn't just public anymore. It had moved inside his head. In Montecito, the mood was thick with tension. Meghan could sense it every time she looked at him. He smiled less, spoke less, ate less. Most of all, he avoided mirrors. He hated seeing his own face, the one the world had twisted into a meme. Every glance felt like a reminder that he'd lost control of his story again. The house had become a kind of quiet prison. Paparazzi cars lingered outside the gates. Journalists called the staff pretending to be delivery drivers. Online threads tracked Harry's whereabouts in real time. Even the mail brought reminders, letters from strangers offering sympathy, others mocking him. One note arrived with a TK Maxx gift card taped to it. Meghan burned it immediately. Harry tried to shrug it off. "People think they're being funny," he said. But she knew the look in his eyes, that haunted stare that always appeared when he felt cornered. At night, the two would sit on the patio, the California breeze carrying the distant sound of the ocean. Meghan would talk, filling the silence, but Harry barely responded. His thoughts were elsewhere, back in that studio, under those lights, hearing the laughter again. He told her one night, voice trembling, "You know what hurts the most? I laughed too. I laughed with them. I let them." Meghan reached for his hand, but he pulled away gently. "Harry, you were trying to be gracious." He shook his head. "No, I was trying to survive it. I could feel it turning, Meg. I felt it in my gut. But I just froze." She looked at him carefully. "Then we don't freeze next time." But there was no next time. Not yet. Not until he found the courage to face what had happened. The next few days blurred together. Harry's team tried to manage the PR fallout, suggesting positive distractions, charity appearances, friendly interviews, social media statements. But every idea felt hollow. Anything he said now would sound defensive. Any appearance would look like damage control. So he stayed quiet. That silence, however, was its own kind of noise. The internet mistook it for weakness. Hashtags mocking his fragile ego trended daily. Late-night hosts replayed the podcast, adding laugh tracks over his lines. One clip superimposed cartoon sweat droplets on his face, racking up millions of views. Every time Harry opened his phone, he saw himself being laughed at by strangers who'd never met him. It wasn't the first time, but this one cut deeper. Because this time, he'd walked right into it. He wasn't ambushed by tabloids or chased by paparazzi. He'd volunteered for the humiliation. The guilt of that ate at him. One morning, he sat alone in the living room, phone in hand, watching the clip for what must have been the 100th time. His reflection in the dark screen looked older, heavier. His voice from the recording echoed in his head. "I'm sweating, mate." The way he said it, nervous, vulnerable, trying to be funny but failing, it sounded desperate now. He turned the phone off and stared out the window. "I sound pathetic," he whispered. Megan heard him from the doorway. "You don't sound pathetic, you sound human." He didn't answer. That afternoon, his publicist called again. "We need to respond, Harry." Even a short statement. Something like, "I appreciate comedy, but trauma isn't a punchline. It'll reframe the story." But Harry refused. "If I say anything, it feeds it. They'll twist it again. They always do." The publicist sighed. "Then at least talk to someone about it. A therapist, maybe." "I've talked enough," he said flatly, and hung up. That evening, Megan found him sitting by the pool with an unopened beer beside him. He'd been sober for months, but the temptation lingered. The headlines had a way of pushing him back toward old habits. "Harry," she said softly, taking the bottle away. "Don't let them win like this." He looked up at her, eyes tired. "It's not about them winning. It's about me losing. Every time I try to be honest, it backfires. Maybe people don't want honesty. Maybe they just want entertainment." "Then stop giving them what they want," she replied firmly. But he shook his head. "It's not that simple. You can't control perception. Once you're in the spotlight, they don't see you anymore. They see whatever makes the best story." Megan crouched beside him. "Then write the story yourself. Again, but this time on your terms." He smiled faintly, though the smile didn't last. "You think people still care what I have to say?" "They will," she said. "Once you make them listen." It was a comforting thought, but one that felt impossible. How could he reclaim his voice when even his silence was being mocked? Meanwhile, Hasan Minhaj was facing his own quiet reckoning. The controversy around the episode had reached his inner circle. Some colleagues defended him, others kept their distance. His wife, Bina, finally told him what no one else would. "You hurt him," she said simply. Hasan looked away. "I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't erase impact." He sighed. "I was trying to make a point about privilege, about how fame distorts empathy." Bina folded her arms. "You made a point, and a man cried for it." Hasan didn't respond. He replayed the clip again that night, just like Harry did. But instead of seeing the humor, he saw the shift, that tiny moment where the light in Harry's eyes dimmed. He'd seen it before, on other faces, in other interviews. But this one stuck with him. Maybe because this time, the punchline was too real. The next morning, he called his producer. "I want to take the clip down." The producer laughed awkwardly. "You can't. It's gone. Everyone's mirrored it. It's on 1,000 accounts by now. Pulling it won't kill it. It'll make it bigger." Hasan hung up and stared at his phone. The machine he'd built, the empire of laughter and truth, was out of his control now too. Back in Montecito, the pressure finally cracked. It happened during a charity Zoom call. Harry was supposed to deliver a short message about resilience and mental health. It was meant to be simple, a few minutes of hope and gratitude. But halfway through, as he spoke about vulnerability, his voice wavered. He tried to push through it. But the memory of the laughter, the clip, the headlines, all collided at once. He stopped mid-sentence, eyes glassy, and muttered, "I'm sorry. I can't." Then he turned off his camera. The clip leaked within hours. "Prince Harry breaks down during mental health call," the headlines read. And the comments followed, predictable and cruel. "Still sweating, huh?" one read. Another, "Guess he needed a discount on tissues too." It was relentless. By now, even his closest allies urged him to speak publicly. "Take back the narrative," they said. "Explain what happened." But Harry couldn't. He felt hollowed out. Like he had nothing left to defend. Late one night, Megan found him sitting in the garden, staring at the dark sky. She sat beside him without saying a word. After a long silence, he whispered, "Do you ever wish we'd stayed quiet? Never done interviews, never written anything, never opened up." Megan looked at him. "Sometimes. But then I remember, silence didn't protect us before. It just buried us." Harry nodded slowly, as if trying to believe it. "Then maybe I was wrong to think honesty could save me." She reached for his hand. "Honesty doesn't save you, Harry. It frees you, even if it hurts." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Feels more like punishment." Neither spoke after that. The sound of the ocean filled the space between them, steady and cold. A week later, an email arrived from a palisade. It was short, polite, but cutting. "His Majesty has seen the interview. He expressed disappointment in how the Duke presented himself publicly. We hope you're both well." Harry read it twice. Then he closed his laptop and whispered, "Even now, it's still about presentation." The next day, a headline broke in the British press: King Charles privately embarrassed by Harry's podcast meltdown. And that was the final blow. Because the moment his family's disapproval became public, the shame turned inward. Harry's composure, the last thread holding him together, finally snapped. He stopped taking calls, stopped replying to friends. He spent hours in his office, rereading Spare like it belonged to someone else. Each page felt heavier now, each confession a weapon waiting to be used against him. He closed the book, eyes red, and muttered to the empty room, "Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have stayed the Spare." And as he sat there, surrounded by silence and regret, his phone buzzed with a notification. A new podcast episode had dropped. Hasan Minhaj, the same man who'd made the world laugh at him, had released a follow-up episode titled, "When the Joke Goes Too Far." Harry stared at the screen, uncertain whether to listen. But what he didn't know was that inside that episode, Hasan was about to say something no one expected, something that would change everything again. Because sometimes, redemption begins where ridicule ends. And the next voice Harry would hear wasn't laughter, it was an apology.